Chapter 306, Giant Bishop. In the evening, Klein sat down on a reclining chair in his activity room. Warmed by the fireplace, he picked up the information that Isengard's assistant had just delivered. As soon as his idea received praise from the great detective in the morning, Kazlana immediately claimed that she needed the same piece of information. Stuart had murmured that he had believed Klein was an excellent detective, given his calmness and composure when he faced Adol's case, but he hadn't expected him to be that outstanding. At the same time, he told Klein that if he needed help, he could find him. He knew a lot of people in the detective circles in Backland. Isengard Stanton also promised to immediately contact the police and try to provide the corresponding information to the detectives who needed it before nightfall. He truly was very trustworthy.
At the next Tarot Club, I'll have to ask Little Sun Through the World about the characteristics of Sequence 6 Devil and what powers the Beyonders of this sequence possess. I didn't plan on involving myself previously, so I had forgotten to gather the corresponding amount of information. However, since I've decided to help, it's best to be prepared. At the very least, I would know what's happening when danger rears its head.
Klein thought for a few seconds. Then he lowered his head and, under the light of the gas lamp, began to look through the unsolved serial murders in the last 20 years of the Lowen Kingdom. There were fewer than he had expected. There were a total of 4 in Backland, 5 in the other cities, a total of 9 in total.
Yeah, although this world doesn't have the concept of DNA yet and lacks many necessary detective skills, with the impetus of the Emperor, there's already a rudimentary form of fingerprint investigations. Furthermore, there's mediumship, divination, dream entry, and other Beyonder methods. The police usually wouldn't seek out Beyonder teams from the 3 major churches for individual murder cases that don't involve the nobles, the rich, or officials. However, a serial killer has very negative repercussions. It easily causes panic, so they'll definitely make the wisest choice. This way, having only a few unsolved serial murders in the past 20 years is reasonable and logical.
Klein quickly understood the reason. He gathered his thoughts and began flipping through the cases, one after another. In the absence of sufficient information to perform a divination, he had initially selected 2 serial killings that might be related to the current incident and intended to use them as an initial starting point. One case occurred 4 years ago. There were 5 victims, all single prostitutes with a child. They had been mistreated before they died, but lacked any evidence of sexual intercourse. The police in charge of the case at the time thought that the murderer must have known the whores, or else it would have been impossible to precisely select individuals with a child. They had identified the suspects from the people who lived nearby and from the regular customers of several of the whores, but in the end, they failed to find the real murderer. Although the dossier only made a brief note, Klein could clearly tell that they had asked for the help of Beyonders from the 3 major churches. Unfortunately, they were still unable to crack the case.
With the Beyonder powers of the Abyss, being able to tell signs that a woman had once been a degenerate doesn't go against the law of mysticism. Likewise, for recognizing an individual as a prostitute, but it doesn't make sense that they would know that the woman was single with only 1 child. The police were right. What was the problem? The real murderer was like me, able to resist dreams, divination, mediumship, and evade the investigations from mid-sequence Nighthawk and mandated Punisher Beyonders? It's possible. Although the church doesn't lack knowledge about the serial killer, the murderer might have had some fortuitous encounters.
Klein picked out some problems from his own standpoint.
I'm analyzing them by being part of their kind. I really didn't fail to live up to the name of Moriarty.
He gave a self-deprecating comment and decided that the first target would still be the 4 from Backland.
Yes, I'll get Mr. Stanton to confirm the suspect's current address and condition through the police, and I'll ask Stuart to get others to help. That way, I wouldn't appear directly so as to avoid encountering any official Beyonders. After the situation has been clarified, I can gather the suspects, belongings, and move them above the gray fog to make mystical deductions.
Klein quickly worked out a plan. The second case had taken place 11 years ago. 4 cases of dismembered corpses had happened in succession. Originally, these cases were considered as isolated cases until the police began having suspicions over the way the bodies were handled. Only then was it confirmed that it was a case of serial murders. The victims were men and women who had worked till late at night before they returned home. They weren't robbed, and there had been no common connection between them. Due to the delay, time which was very valuable when the crime was first committed, the case failed to produce any clues pointing to a suspect.
This is a problem caused by mishandling the case. If they had quickly received the help of a spirit medium, the wraith of the deceased might even gather around the murderer. Of course, it's also possible that the wraith can be killed by the murderer. Just like this case, there's probably only ashes of those victims left. It will be hard to do any investigations through them.
Klein rubbed his temples, and when he saw that it was evening, he stopped considering the case and got up from his reclining chair to leave Minsk Street. He had something to do that night. He wanted to go to the area south of the bridge, to the Harvest Church on Rose Street, to find Bishop Utrovsky in a bid to obtain the apothecary formula. He had already divined to see if it was dangerous or not. To Klein, having an apothecary as a subordinate was extremely helpful. He could get injured or fall sick. He could encounter enemies who could harm him, and an apothecary who he could find at any moment would be someone he could rely on. After making a detour to Eastborough, Klein disguised himself and took the steam metro to cross the Tussock River and arrived at the district south of the bridge. Along the way, the darkness along the metro line and the corresponding gas lamps formed an unforgettable scene. While on the public carriage, Klein came to Rose Street and found the tiny Harvest Church, which was easily recognizable. The Golden Cathedral had a more striking steeple and a sacred emblem of life engraved on its outer wall. It was a baby surrounded by the symbols of wheat, flowers, and spring water. It stood out from the surrounding buildings. At that moment, the cathedral's lights were dim, and there wasn't a single devotee inside. Klein sneaked in from the side, carefully dabbing his face with paint rather than relying solely on his ability to create illusions. In the hall of the cathedral, rows of pews were arranged neatly. Right at the top, at the front, there was a large sacred emblem of life. Candles were lit on both sides of it. A tall man in his 40s or 50s, wearing a brown clergyman's attire, sat in the front pew. Just by sitting there, he was like a small mountain, giving off an extremely oppressive feeling. The man wore a bishop's bonnet, and his eyebrows were light and thin. There were obvious wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, his cheeks, and the corners of his mouth. He had his eyes closed tightly, his hands clasped as he pressed them to his chin, as if in the most pious of confessions. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, revealing a patch of light blueness. The 40 to 50-year-old man didn't raise his head as he spoke in a low and gentle voice.
The Mother's Church will not reject anyone. Why didn't you take the main entrance?
Klein walked out of the shadows.
Are you Bishop Utrovsky?
The tall man in the brown bishop's attire replied gently.
I prefer to be called a father, Father Utrovsky.
All right, my lord.
Klein deliberately laughed.
Your name and your height tell me that you're from Faceac. Why do you believe in Earth Mother?
Bishop Utrovsky raised his head slightly and stared at the sacred emblem of life ahead of him and said with emotion,
I was born along the coasts of mid-seashore India. I was a man who was passionate about combat and killing.
Indaw? He really is from the Faceac Empire.
Klein nodded indiscernibly. Mid-seashore was the natural border between Lowen, Intis, and Faceac. The east coast belonged to Lowen, most of the west coast belonged to Intis, and to the north were the famous port cities of the Faceac Empire, such as Indaw. In addition, the mid-seashore spread to the northeast, penetrating through the Faceac Empire's territory and connecting with the North Sea. There were many islands in that part of the sea that were the habitats for polar bears and sea lions. Hunting polar bears and sea lions were a traditional festival for the citizens of Faceac. Just as his thoughts began to wander a little, Bishop Utrovsky continued looking forward and said,
I committed a serious crime and fled to the Sonia Sea, where I became a ruthless pirate. I was lucky enough to meet a missionary of Earth Mother before I fell into the true hell of the soul. After that day, I understood the value of life, understood the charms of all living things, and gained the joy that stems purely from life itself. I swore in front of the Earth Mother's sacred emblem that I would spread her faith in other countries to make up for my bloody past. Thus, here I am. I came here.
Amidst his calm and emotional voice, Bishop Utrovsky stood up. He was over 2.2 meters tall, and his build was sturdy. His robes were tight, and he looked like a giant from the legends who reappeared on the northern continent.
A real giant is 3 to 5 meters tall, with a single vertical eye. The citizens of the Fasak Empire are generally tall. It's no wonder that they've always claimed to be the remnants of giants, believing that they have the blood of giants.
Klein had to raise his neck to look at the priest's face. Bishop Utrovsky asked, with his head lowered,
What are you doing here?
Klein, who had donned a disguise, went straight to the point.
I heard you have a request and that the reward is the apothecary formula.
Bishop Utrovsky fell silent for a few seconds before saying,
Yes, although I'm not sure where you learned of this. It's true.
Klein asked with a smile,
Then, what task is it?
Utrovsky sized him up seriously for a while before saying,
I don't think you can fulfill my request.
Klein frowned.
Perhaps I can? I need to know the details before I can make an evaluation.
Utrovsky stood there like a giant pillar. After a few seconds, he said,
My request is,
At this point, he closed his eyes and said,
kill me.
Chapter 307, Dawn Paladin. Kill you? It was the first time Klein had heard of such a request, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond to such a task. He even started to suspect if there was a conspiracy. Bishop Utrovsky opened his eyes and looked down at Klein.
Kill the old me.
Father, can you not have such long pauses when you're speaking?
Klein's mouth twitched as he asked in puzzlement.
Even in the legends and myths, no one can return to the past. I'm afraid this task of yours can only be accomplished by the 7 gods.
No, I mean, killing the past me which has never died as it resides in the depths of my heart.
Seeing that Klein was still confused, the slightly hunchbacked bishop said,
The former me, who used to love to kill and fight, didn't completely die just because of my contrition. I can clearly sense that he's still living inside my body, always wanting to regain control of everything, and I am constantly suppressing him, hoping that he will be redeemed through mass, ascetic cultivation, and preaching, making him truly believe in the teachings of the Earth Mother and become one with me again.
Simply put, the imprints of the past are too deep, and they fiercely conflict with your current life, resulting in a split personality.
The pseudopsychologist and keyboard warrior Klein Moretti made a preliminary judgment and said in deliberation,
It's a psychological problem. I think what you need most is a psychiatrist.
I've attempted that before. Perhaps you aren't aware. There is a doctor sequence among the Beyonder pathway that the Church of Earth Mother controls, which is also known as healing pastor in ancient times. They've studied my problem and believe it's not as simple as a psychological ailment. It's also mixed with the inclination of losing control. If the past me defeats the present me, I will lose control without a doubt and become a monster.
Utrovsky said with a sigh.
Then what you need is the Spectator Pathway's Sequence 7 psychiatrist.
Klein thought for a moment and said,
Your words make me believe that you've found a way to solve your problem, but you only lack a suitable executor, am I right?
Yes, all these years, besides preaching, I've also been searching for people and objects that can help me. In the end, with Earth Mother's blessings, I obtained a very mystical item. It is said to be a relic of an ancient dragon.
Seeing that Klein wasn't scared away, Utrovsky answered with some hope.
It allows the wielder to enter the deepest part of the target's soul, or, in other words, the bottom of the target's dreamland. There, a corresponding scene will be materialized. That way, you can see the past me directly, and then, through combat, eliminate him. In that special state, once he is truly dead, he will never appear again.
As expected of the mysterious world, there's actually such a method to treat someone with split personalities.
Klein sighed with emotion and cautiously asked,
What restrictions are there? Or what harm will it cause to the holder? Why do you think I'm incapable of completing this task?
Bishop Utrovsky looked down at Klein and said,
Once you use that mystical item, although the owner will remain conscious, there are many layers to the soul or dreamland. The past me will be able to make full use of this point to deceive you, or conversely, they can even kill you. And after a set period of time, yes, 5 minutes, that mystical item will make you completely lose consciousness, and your mind will never be able to return to your body and become its sacrifice. In this way, you will become a vegetable. In addition, as a result of the scene's materialization, if you're killed in the deepest part of your heart, or, to put it in another way, the lowest level of the dreamland, similar side effects will occur. It's equivalent to true death. Believe me, the past me is much stronger than you think.
So that's how it is. However, this issue isn't a problem at all for me. I'm someone who can stay awake and rational during spirit channeling and dreams. Even if that mystical item wants to make me lose myself completely, there's no need to worry too much. As long as there's room for struggle, I can take 4 steps counterclockwise and chant my honorific name and directly head above the gray fog. The problem is, how strong is the past Bishop Utrovsky, and what are my chances of defeating him? What restrictions or taboos are there in fighting in a materialized spiritual world?
Klein thought for a while and said,
How strong were you, Father Utrovsky? I don't think I would definitely lose.
Bishop Utrovsky's eyes turned adrift for a moment.
I was a warrior. I have already reached sequence 6 of my Beyonder pathway, becoming a Dawn Paladin.
So he's not a Beyonder of the Planter pathway. He himself said that he had committed a crime and become a pirate before being converted by the Church of Earth Mother. Sequence 6. Yes, it's not like I can't win. A magician is the kind of Beyonder that's much stronger if they make preparations in advance. Also, due to my uniqueness, the deepest part of my heart, or the lowest level of my dreamland, can be considered as my home ground.
Klein pondered for a few seconds and said,
Will that mystical item weaken him?
Yes, but it's still his main region of activity, so the weakening wouldn't be too great. At most, it would be like he had already fought an intense battle.
Utrovsky recalled his previous attempts.
That just raises my chances.
Klein continued.
Is there anything I need to pay attention to in that special environment?
Just like real combat, effective attacks are always effective, illusions will remain illusions, but one thing must be noted, he can bring you into a few other levels of the dreamland at any time, creating a situation where it's hard to determine whether it's reality or an illusion.
Bishop Utrovsky emphasized.
So, you have to be at least at sequence 6 or some other special sequence 7 to be able to complete this mission. And the risk is nothing trivial. If I didn't swear on a holy artifact of Earth Mother that I wouldn't ask the Church for help before my missionary succeeds, things wouldn't have been so difficult.
So that's how it is. I'm not afraid of a dream.
The corner of Klein's mouth curled up.
Final question. Are there any points to take note of when fighting a Dawn Paladin?
Bishop Utrovsky frowned his wrinkled face and said with a sigh,
This is something that requires absolute secrecy for Beyonders. However, as long as you participate in enough battles, others would often be able to conclude certain traits. Besides, the more details you know, the higher the chances of success are, right?
Yes.
Klein answered frankly with a nod. In a reminiscent tone, Bishop Utrovsky said,
A Dawn Paladin possesses a power akin to that of a giant, enabling the area within a 40 to 50 meter radius to be basked in the light of dawn. Such light can not only dispel illusions, but it also has the special ability to exorcise wraiths and specters, and it can even weaken evil spirits. They can conjure dawn armor around their bodies, which would be equivalent to specially forged full-body armor that doesn't weigh anything or inhibit their motion in any way. If destroyed, recovery would require a certain amount of time. He can also conjure different weapons. The strongest weapon would be a two-handed great sword. It's often called the Sword of Dawn. It's sharp, solid, and each strike has a purification effect. Apart from that, Dawn Paladins have a type of Beyonder power to create a hurricane of light. It can directly destroy a person's body, eliminate wraiths, and damage evil spirits.
There aren't a lot of Beyonder powers, but they are my natural enemy. They have high offensive strength and defense, and they're not afraid of illusions. The only good news is that, other than for facing wraiths and specters, the mysteriousness of a Dawn Paladin is very low.
Klein listened as he simulated a combat situation in his mind, searching for the most reliable way to deal with a Dawn Paladin. The level of mysteriousness he was referring to implied strangeness, unpredictability, unfathomability, and incomprehensibility. Bishop Utravsky looked at him quietly. He didn't press him or drive him away. After gradually formulating a plan, Klein raised his head, looked over, and said,
Perhaps I can give it a try, but I will need to leave for a few minutes to confirm that you're not lying.
Bishop Utravsky replied with a slightly stunned voice.
No problem. However, I must remind you once again, although I don't know where your confidence stems from, do not belittle the past me. He's extremely skilled in combat.
I wouldn't joke with my life.
Klein pressed his hand to his chest, bowed, and stepped out of the Harvest Church. He found a secluded spot and quickly went above the gray fog to make a divination. After obtaining an answer that there was a certain danger, but at tolerable levels, he immediately returned to the real world. From the beginning to the end, it only took him about 10 to 20 seconds above the gray fog. Following that, Klein returned to the Harvest Church and said to Bishop Utravsky, who stood in his original spot,
I'll take this commission.
Bishop Utravsky stared at him intently before slowly saying,
If you succeed, not only will I give you the apothecary formula, but I will also gift you a mystical item without much of a negative side effect.
Klein was taken aback at first, before he sincerely praised,
Father, you truly are a generous person.
Bishop Utravsky didn't say another word. He took a strange candle from a concealed pocket in his brown clergyman's tunic. The outer layer of the short candle seemed to be wrapped in a layer of human skin, but there were also several bumps on it. Its wick was about the length of a finger segment and was entirely black in color. It was covered in tiny, densely packed, scale-like patterns.
Ignite it with your spirituality.
Utravsky handed the tiny, strange candle to Klein. Instead of following his instructions, Klein took out a matchbox, took out a few of them, and put them in his trouser pocket. He lit and blew out a few other matchsticks before throwing them at various corners of the cathedral. Then he adjusted the positions of the paper figurines, paper notes, long strips of paper, Azek's copper whistle, and various charms. This was in preparation for the worst-case scenario that he could imagine. After all of this was done, Klein snapped his fingers, causing a blue-colored flame of spirituality to appear. Sizzle. He held the flame close to the top of the tiny candle and watched the black wick light up. Nothing seemed to change, but Klein was acutely aware that he had entered the world of the mind. Directly in front of him, he saw Bishop Utravsky still standing in his original spot. His sturdy body, which was more than 2.2 meters tall, gave off a sense of oppression. Gase. The repentant bishop looked down at him, his facial muscles contorting. Following that, his expression became abnormally ferocious. Soon after, Klein discovered that the surrounding light and shadows were rapidly transforming, and it felt like he was experiencing a real, intense battle. Pa! At the end of the battle, Bishop Utravsky fell heavily to the ground. His breathless body had blood flowing profusely. Klein's mouth twitched as he saw the scene before him with a clear mind. He silently evaluated.
What a professional performance. But I know that this is a dream within a dream.
Chapter 308. A Prepared Magician. When Klein looked down again, he could no longer see the strange candle wrapped in human skin. Instead, a faint, slightly sweet scent kept lingering around his nose. Ignoring the Bishop Utravsky's body that was lying down in a pool of his own blood, he took out his matchbox and lit one matchstick. The blood on the ground disappeared as soon as the spark was produced, and the messy church hall became tidy once again. The gargantuan Utravsky slowly got up, looked down at Klein, and said with a twisted face,
It actually didn't have any effect. It's no wonder that you dared to accept this task. However, this is your misfortune. I didn't actually want to kill you.
As he spoke, the candlelight on both sides of the cathedral began to flicker visibly. The entire hall suddenly brightened, but it was mild and not blinding. It was as if the morning sun had just come in. The invisible spirit quickly vanished, and Klein, without a word, threw the match, flexed his cheeks, and simulated a sound. Bang! An invisible air bullet shot out and struck Bishop Utrovsky heavily in the chest, producing a resounding sound. However, the giant bishop had at some point equipped a set of silver armor that covered his entire body. It included gauntlets, breastplates, and a helmet. At that moment, a spiderweb-like crack appeared on the silver metal at his chest, but it didn't completely shatter. It even began to slowly recover. Bang! Bang! Klein produced a series of sounds, creating 2 air bullets that followed one after the other, sending them towards the enemy's chest in a bid to completely destroy the enemy's defenses with a continuous barrage of attacks. However, he saw that in Bishop Utrovsky's hand was a heavy, wide great sword, looking as if it was condensed from light. Using it, he deftly blocked the 2 air bullets, producing 2 sounds which were almost impossible to distinguish. Creak! Utrovsky took 1 step forward, and the cathedral seemed to shake. At the same time, his 2-handed great sword swept down at Klein in a gesture that looked as if it was going to shatter the building. Before the sword arrived, the wind that it carried with it almost caused Klein to lose his balance. As this thought flashed through his mind.
Such terrifying power.
Klein deftly jumped to the side and bent over, ready to roll on the spot. Bang! The 2-handed great sword in Utrovsky's hands smashed into the ground, shattering the stone slabs and causing cracks to spread rapidly in all directions. Screech! He dragged the great sword along the ground as he switched from a vertical slash to a horizontal sweep, causing sparks to fly. This move was meant for opponents who loved to roll. Just as Klein was about to hit the ground, the image of himself being struck by the 2-handed great sword appeared in his mind. He quickly swung his arms and reached out with his palms. He lightly pressed and once again leaped into the air. Whoosh! The resulting wind blew across the dust on the ground, and the terrifying great sword flattened the nearby pews. However, before Klein could counterattack, the giant bishop chained his attack without any pause. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. 5 strikes, 6 strikes, 7 strikes. Utrovsky seemed to possess extremely robust stamina. His unceasing, storm-like attacks lasted for dozens of seconds. He used the simplest of sword techniques, slashing vertically, slashing diagonally, sweeping horizontally, thrusting forward and bashing forward, to demonstrate what was the most effective and reasonable way to deal the most damage. And the range of the 2-handed great sword reached a terrifying extent. Klein jumped, rolled, and ran. He didn't have the opportunity to use his powers and appeared rather pathetic. If it wasn't for the matches that he'd thrown ahead of time in different corners of the cathedral, and how the candle on both sides of the altar had yet to be extinguished, allowing him to flash, he probably would have been slain by his enemy. Klein didn't panic because of this.
As expected of a Beyonder job that's adept at combat, no mistakes, no weaknesses.
Amidst his rolling and dodging, he constantly looked for any flaws that the enemy had, waiting for his attacks to reach a moderate stage. Finally, he discovered a problem with Utrovsky's sword techniques. The 2-handed great sword was too long and too large, and it had an obvious flaw in close combat. With this thought flashing in his mind, Klein took advantage of the great sword's vertical slash to roll forward to the left. And then, with a push of his palm, he quickly rolled to the spot between Utrovsky's legs. As a half-giant who was over 2.2 meters tall, Utrovsky would have his legs spread apart from simply standing. His silver crotch was clearly visible. As soon as he rolled over, Klein's left hand reached into his pocket, pulled out a long piece of paper, and turned it into a sharp and hard cane. He then inserted it into the gap at the side of the enemy's crotch, stabbing into the body of the giant bishop. This would be a fatal blow. However, at this moment, his heart trembled. The image of a great sword stabbing down as boundless light forming a terrifying storm, engulfed his entire body, appeared in his mind. Klein didn't hesitate.
A trap. Utrovsky's trap.
He pressed his right hand down, jumped forward through the gap between the legs of the giant bishop's legs, and arrived behind him. By the time he finished this set of motions, Utrovsky was holding the hilt of his sword with both hands, bending his waist and lifting his sword up to thrust straight down into the stone slab in front of him. With a cracking sound, rays of light surged out of the sword's body like the first rays of dawn. They turned into a hurricane and swept across the surroundings. Without a sound, the stone slab disappeared from where Klein had been, and the earth beneath it became nearly 10 centimeters thinner. The silver armor on his legs and crotch was also damaged, shattering inch by inch and revealing his skin. With Forechai, his trap was to sustain damage in exchange for the death of his enemy. At this moment, Klein, who had leaped behind Bishop Utrovsky, finally found an opportunity to counterattack. He twisted his body midair, puffed out his cheeks, and simulated gunshot sounds at the back of his enemy's head. Bang! Bang! 2 air bullets hit the back of Utrovsky's head in quick succession, shattering the silver metal in that area, and then splitting it into pieces, exposing a completely unprotected area. Klein was about to give him a fatal blow when Utrovsky suddenly straightened up, twisted his waist, and violently swept the 2-handed greatsword backward. The speed was so fast and the attack was so ferocious that Klein seemed unable to dodge it. However, he pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket and placed it in front of his body. Clang! The collision between the sword and the piece of paper produced the sound of metal being struck. The crisp sound of metal striking metal filled the entire cathedral. Fiona. Klein was sent flying like a tennis ball. The paper in his hand was torn apart, leaving behind only a tiny piece in between his fingers. In midair, he was immediately faced with the violent and swift pursuit of Utrovsky. The situation was precarious. However, he didn't panic in the slightest and only shook his wrist. The tiny piece of paper flew up and a spark rapidly expanded, completely enveloping Klein. Hum! The great sword sliced through the ball of fire, but it didn't cause any damage, only creating a small spark. At the candle on the right side of the cathedral, a faint yellow flame spread out, forming a figure whose face was painted with oil paint. Klein reappeared and pulled out another long strip of paper from his pocket. Pa! With a flick of his wrist, the paper turned into a sturdy whip. The surface of the whip was even burning with scarlet flames. Pa! 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 Klein lashed out at the giant bishop from a distance. Pa! However, his weapon quickly disintegrated under the attacks of the 2-handed great sword. And that was precisely Klein's goal! Pa! 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 With a snap of his fingers, he sent streaks of fire flaring up from the ground, blocking Utrovsky and burning his unprotected legs. The Dawn Armor's recovery was rather slow. As the tongues of fire leaped upwards, his legs were charred black and a crimson color was seeping up his legs. However, this didn't affect the giant bishop's agility. He let out a low growl, and like a steam train that had finally accelerated to its highest speed, he charged through the flames and appeared in front of Klein. This speed was unbelievably fast. Soon after, the 2-handed great sword in Utrovsky's hands cracked, turning into spots of light that swept forth in all directions. Almost instantly, Klein fell into a situation of certain death. The matches he kept on him were ignited, and an intense flame engulfed him. However, this wasn't as fast as the hurricane of light. Just as the scarlet-red flame appeared, it was immediately engulfed. Klein's body was torn asunder as it was reduced to shreds, but they ended up losing their thickness and turned into bits of paper. Behind Utrovsky, a column of scarlet-red flames flared, and Klein stepped out. He took out a matchbox from his other pocket and threw it at the enemy, as if to ignite all the remaining matches in one go, and, through the restraints of the small space, create a reliable explosion. The matchbox was aimed at Utrovsky's lower body, which no longer had any protection. Klein raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. At the same time, Bishop Utravsky jumped up on his back, bent his knees, and withdrew his legs. Pa! Accompanied by the snap of his fingers was an unaffected matchbox, but a loud bang. It was an air bullet that accurately tore open the back of Bishop Utravsky's head, which lacked any protection. It was a lethal weapon that had been prepared in advance. His skull split open, and blood and white bits spurted out. With great difficulty, Utravsky turned his head around and said in a daze,
"You."
The matchbox that was riddled with holes caused by the hurricane of light fell to the ground. However, it remained unignited. Klein laughed and replied,
I've never said that snapping my fingers could only be used to control flames and not shoot out air bullets. Look.
Pa! 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 He snapped his fingers repeatedly, allowing one air bullet after another to hit Utravsky in the head, shattering his helmet and cracking his head. Bam! Utravsky stopped breathing and fell heavily to the ground, shaking the cathedral hall slightly. Pa! Klein turned and snapped his fingers again. The box of matches on the ground exploded, transforming into a scarlet flame that buried Utravsky's gigantic body. Klein didn't attempt to sense the existence of the candle, but instead he relied on his own clarity of mind to force himself out of the lowest level of his mind. Behind him, the corpse was wrapped in scarlet flames as the world around him disintegrated bit by bit. Chapter 309, Choosing One Out of Two. The illusory feeling passed, and Klein saw the strange candle in his hand again, along with its black wick and palish white flame. The damage of the Dawn Paladin, the shattered ground, broken pews, and the sliced candles had been restored to their pre-battle state. It was hard to tell where they had been damaged. At some point, Bishop Utravsky, who had been standing opposite him, had taken a seat in the front pew, his back bent forward and his head buried in his hands. His hands were pressed to his temples. Drip, drip. Sweat trickled down his face and spread out from his feet. The ground was already completely wet. When he sensed that the strange candle had been extinguished by Klein, he shuddered and raised his head to meet Klein's eyes. His slightly turbid eyes were filled with tears, and his wrinkled face was streaked with tears. However, his eyes were filled with emotion, joy, and clarity. If it was said that this giant bishop previously appeared tall and heavy, then all that was left of him now was the heaviness of his body, but without the heaviness of his spirit. At this moment, Klein felt like he was looking at a newborn baby. Those tears were proof of new life. Desai. The corners of Utravsky's mouth curled up slightly as he smiled kindly.
"You're much better than I expected."
Klein calmly replied,
No, this is because I gained sufficient understanding in advance and made the appropriate preparations. As for the past you, not only were you unsure of your opponent's strengths, you were also greatly weakened. If I were to fight against you in the real world, I would be considering how to escape.
He added silently in his heart.
A prepared magician and an unprepared magician are very different concepts.
Bishop Utravsky didn't dwell on this problem. Brimming with relief from head to toe, he said,
"Thank you, my friend. According to our agreement, I'll give you the apothecary formula. I'll also give you an additional mystical item."
As he spoke, from his pocket, he took out what looked like a combination of a needle, a tube, and a container. Bishop Utravsky pointed to the object in his hand.
"You have two choices. This is one of the two choices you have. When I got it, I didn't know its name, and I never thought about naming it either. You're able to use it to draw out a tube of blood, your own blood. At a critical moment, you can transfuse it back into you. That way, your fatigue will disappear. Your ailments and injuries will be alleviated, and your strength, speed, balance, and other attributes will all be greatly enhanced."
Klein asked rationally,
What about its limitations and latent dangers?
Utravsky looked at the mysterious patterns on the needle and tube and explained in detail.
After drawing out a tube of blood, you'll be weakened for a full 12 hours. And during those 12 hours, transfusing the blood back into you wouldn't have any effect. Of course, the specific time limit isn't that precise. It increases or decreases according to your body's condition. In addition, it's best not to use it too often. not more than once a week. Otherwise, not only will the transfusion bring you power, but it will also temporarily make you lose your rationality, and the short period when you have your blood drawn and turn weak will become your characteristic. In addition to these, it also has a problem. If you carry it around for more than half an hour, you'll become a little neurotic.
Fortunately, Bishop Utrovsky didn't previously draw his blood. This was the first thought that flashed through Klein's mind.
Otherwise, if the past him can transfuse his blood, my chances of winning would have been very, very low.
He frowned and was rather worried about the negative effects of the mystical item. Regardless of whether it was a temporary loss of rationality, a 12-hour period of weakness, or a change in his mental state, these were all hidden dangers that didn't seem too problematic. But after seeing rampagers and hearing the ravings of an evil god, Klein believed that a Beyonder's mental state was very important. If one's mental state remained at a nadir for an extended period of time, or if there were frequent anomalies, it would easily cause the phenomenon of losing control to happen. This was the same even if a Beyonder had grasped the acting method, Klein said after 2 seconds of silence.
What's the second choice?
Bishop Utrovsky took out a simple brass key from his other pocket and smiled.
This is called a master key. It can help you open any lock which doesn't contain mystical powers, as well as a small number of locks that are augmented with Beyonder effects. And in a place without any locks or doors, it can open a passageway that doesn't belong to reality. The premise is that there are no restrictions by Beyonder powers and the barriers aren't too thick. Its spirituality is completely restrained. When it's not being used, Beyonders cannot see any difference between it and a normal key.
Utrovsky stood up again, leaving Klein no choice but to look up. The giant bishop increased his pace and came to the wall at the side of the cathedral hall and pressed the master key against the brick. He twisted gently, and his entire body seemed to sink into water as ripples were produced. He went through the wall and arrived outside. In the same way, Bishop Utrovsky returned to the cathedral hall and entered Klein's line of sight again. The tall priest asked with his head lowered,
Have you decided on the mystical item?
Klein asked after some deliberation.
What are the latent dangers of the master key?
Bishop Utrovsky smiled warmly and said,
The person carrying it will occasionally get lost. According to what someone told me, one gets lost at random.
Klein mumbled, and his mind gradually came to a decision.
Lost? I'm a seer with spiritual intuition.
After a few seconds, he said,
I want the master key.
He didn't want his mental state to be affected, and he didn't want to accumulate the risk of losing control. He sighed in his heart.
What a pity. What I want the most is that weird candle. It's akin to the deepest part of a soul, the lowest level of a dreamland. That's equivalent to my home ground.
Bishop Utrovsky handed the simple brass key to Klein and took back the strange candle wrapped in human skin.
All right.
While Klein was examining the mystical item, Utrovsky pointed at the back and said,
The apothecary formula is in that room. I'll go get it. Wait here for a while.
Klein nodded in response. Taking advantage of the moment when Bishop Utrovsky's figure disappeared from the hall, he took out a penny and divined if he had been lying about the master key. After receiving an acceptable answer, he walked to the wall in front of him, where a row of candles were placed, and pressed the ancient brass key against the hard wall. As he injected spirituality and turned the key, Klein's vision suddenly blurred and then became clear. At that moment, there were no longer burning candles filling his vision, nor were there neat pews and straight walls. There were only withered grass and muddy land strewn with a bit of garbage. To the side, it led out to where a gas street lamp stood. Klein smiled, nodded, turned, and once again using the master key to successfully return to the cathedral's hall.
I really came out.
After more than 10 seconds of waiting, Utrovsky walked in with heavy footsteps, a roll of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment in hand. The giant bishop handed the apothecary formula to Klein.
You can get an appraisal for this. If there's a problem, you can always find me at the Harvest Church.
Main ingredients: horn of an adult, flying unicorn, 3 grams of a royal jellyfish's venom crystal. Klein swept his gaze, smiled, and replied.
I will confirm its authenticity.
He added inwardly.
For example, divine it above the gray fog.
Bishop Utrovsky nodded slightly, and without another word he turned around and walked to the Earth Mother's sacred emblem of life. He spread his arms wide and chanted in a low voice.
Thank you, Source of Life. Praise you, Mother of all things.
Klein put away the master key in the apothecary formula. After Utrovsky stopped, he said, half-jokingly,
Could it be that my visit was arranged by Earth Mother?
The false believer of the Evernight goddess, Klein, chuckled inwardly.
Why else would you be thanking her for?
Backlund Utrovsky said with a gentle smile without any signs of anger.
Yes, everything is arranged by Earth Mother. Otherwise, my request for help wouldn't have reached your ears. I wouldn't be here in Backlund either, nor would I have obtained this mental terror candle.
Complete and self-consistent believer logic, but Klein suddenly felt that it was impossible to communicate with him. He pressed his hand to his chest, bowed, and said,
Thank you for your generosity. I should leave now.
He straightened his body and quickly retreated. He then rapidly disappeared from the main hall of the cathedral and from Rose Street. 10 minutes later, he saw the golden facade of the Harvest Church from another direction, and he couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He silently muttered to himself,
I can't go back without divination?
He really wanted to stubbornly rely on his own ability to overcome the fact that he was lost. But his hand, which was faster than his voice, had broken the branches of a tree and made a makeshift dowsing rod. Dowsing rod seeking could be used to seek people, as well as items and directions. This time, Klein was able to return home without incident, and he even confirmed the authenticity of the formula and the latent dangers of the master key. The next morning was a Sunday morning. After waking up, Klein ate breakfast, took out a pen and paper, and wrote a letter to Isengard Stanton, asking him to seek help from the police to confirm the current status of the few suspects for the serial murder case from 4 years ago. Back then, the targets were single prostitutes with a child. After folding the letter and stuffing in an envelope, Klein put on a black stamp, which was 1 penny in denomination. Putting on his clothes, he took his hat and cane, and he walked out of his house to post the letter at the mailbox at the end of the street. Then he saw Mrs. Stellan Sammer and her husband, Mr. Luke, dressed to the nines. A rental carriage was stopped by their door. Klein asked with some surprise,
Good morning. Why are you attending a banquet so early in the morning?
Luke chuckled and said,
It's not really a banquet. It's more like us helping out.
Mrs. Stellan raised her chin slightly and added,
Mary has successfully entered the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. There will be a grand ball tonight, and we have to help out in advance.
Klein sighed and said with a smile,
Mrs. Mary's wish has been fulfilled? Impressive. Please pass on my congratulations to Mrs. Mary for me.
Luke Sammer nodded and said,
You haven't read this morning's paper, have you? All the members of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council have been published. The chairman of the council is Sir Durs Shaw, and the first secretary is Mr. Hibbert Hall.
Chapter 310, National Atmospheric Pollution. Council Sir Durs Shaw, Mr. Hibbert Hall.
Who are they? I don't know them at all.
Acting as though he had no doubts, Klein said half-jokingly,
Let's hope that they can bring blue skies and sunshine to Backlund.
Yes, although burning in your own fireplace is everyone's freedom and is a right granted by the law, blue skies and sunshine are more desirable things.
We should go. Mary urgently needs some help.
Luke Sammer, a member of the Soot Reduction Association, sighed with emotion and pointed to the hired carriage. Stellan Sammer added, feigning a level of restraint,
There might be members of Parliament coming to the banquet, from the Backlund district or from the kingdom.
I can imagine the grandeur of this banquet. Klein flattered politely and watched the Sammers board the carriage and leave. As he turned to head for the post office at the end of the street, a postman in a dark green uniform arrived in a carriage and delivered a letter to his letterbox.
A letter for me?
Klein pulled out a bunch of keys and casually chose the one that was simple and had a brass color. Gotcha! The master key easily opened the letterbox.
I just need to have this key on me in the future.
Klein mumbled as he took out the newspapers he had subscribed to and the letter. The letter was from Isengard Stanton. He had also looked through the old and unresolved serial murders yesterday and had picked out the most suspicious ones, and after obtaining a preliminary confirmation from the police department about the present circumstances of the suspects, he had written to Klein, Kaslana, and the other private detectives that were interested in this angle to share his findings. It included the two cases that Klein had focused on.
Great detective minds think alike. The letter I wrote just now was for nothing.
Klein joked before returning to the living room. According to Isengard, the random murder cases of people who returned late had resulted in a large number of suspects, but the suspect had never been narrowed down. After so many years, it was very difficult, almost hopeless, to try to find a new clue. One of the four suspects in the other case was a teenager whose mother was also a victim, a prostitute and single mother who had him as her only child. He had been abused by his mother, had been the police's first suspect, but less than half a year after that case, he had been seriously injured in a gang firefight in East Borough and died in a surgical room at a charity hospital. His body was cremated with people bearing witness before being buried in the cemetery. As such, it was impossible for him to be connected to the current serial killer.
If he hadn't been cremated, I definitely would have dug up the grave to verify it.
Klein, who had once come back from the dead, seriously considered the possibility of the other party coming back from the dead. Of the remaining three suspects, one had moved several times in the past few years. The police had lost track of his situation and needed more time to find him. One had gone through bankruptcy and moved to East Borough from North Borough, while the other was still running a grocery store on the same street. Klein took out a fresh sheet of paper, described the situation, and then asked the recipient to observe the two suspects with specific addresses in secret. He emphasized,
"The killers of serial murders are all cruel, brutal, and very aggressive. Please be careful not to get too close to them. Act as if you're just an ordinary neighbor observing them. The information I need pertains to their recent mental state, such as whether they are irritable, whether they like to shut themselves in their rooms, rarely communicate with others, and whether they have beaten others up."
This was also the information he got from the son. After each kill, the devil would eat the victim's organs according to the ritual and stay in a bloodthirsty, manic state until a new victim appeared. After emphasizing the need to take note of the investigator's safety, Klein folded the letter, stuffed it into a new envelope, and affixed a black stamp to the surface. Then he wrote down the name of the recipient, Detective Stewart. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Susie was lying in the corner of the study, looking around as if bored. With a bulging stomach, Earl Hall took a puff with his pipe and said to his eldest son,
"Do you know why I insisted on having you be on the National Atmospheric Pollution Council?"
Hibbert Hall replied thoughtfully,
"You wish to influence the formulation of the relevant laws and policies?"
No, although I'm the second largest shareholder of the Constant Coal and Steel Consortium, I don't really care about this problem. I've been urging them to make adjustments accordingly. I have no doubt that fixing atmospheric pollution is a future trend. Hibbert, although our family has fixed seats in the House of Lords, and you will also become a member of Parliament of the House of Lords in time. So why do some nobles have more influence than others when they are all members of Parliament of the House of Lords, notwithstanding the Speaker and other people with special statuses?
Hibbert thought for a moment before saying,
The title of nobility, wealth, commercial status, as well as the relationship between the government and the army?
That is only a part of it. In addition to one's own ability to handle matters, people will always rely on those with rich experience and those who have participated in many similar matters. In the future, if you wish to have any achievement in politics, in addition to inheriting a seat, you will also need to try your best at participating in various matters and display the corresponding capabilities. Gradually, your activity will catch the eye of the various members of Parliament, They will slowly find you trustworthy, and that will be the source of your influence. Look at the current situation of the nobles in the Intis Republic, Hibbert. You should understand that with the passage of time and the development of society, the obvious privileges will be weakened, and one's title will become less and less important. It's just a title of honor, and the position and influence of the business world is what you should pay attention to.
Earl Hall explained in detail.
What if you encounter something you aren't good at?
Hibbert muttered to himself.
Then pretend that you can handle it. Don't worry about wasting money. Form professional teams, listen to their opinions, and make decisions. Everyone has a lot of areas that they aren't good at, and only money is multifaceted.
Earl Hall gave words of advice.
I see, Father.
At this moment, Susie, who was by the side, yawned in boredom. When it was all over, she slipped into Audrey's art studio, repeated everything she had heard, and finally muttered,
I have no idea what they were talking about.
Audrey listened to her thoughtfully. Then she said, with a faint smile,
They were discussing a good thing that involves reducing the pungent smell you smell.
Is that so?
Susie asked, without fully comprehending it.
Audrey didn't answer and thought of something else. She had intended to quietly draw attention to the bad conditions of Eastborough, the factory area, and the dock area, but in the last two social gatherings, she had found herself unable to find an opportunity. Those nobles, those members of Parliament and senior civil servants would never even talk about such matters. There was no way to steer them towards that topic, even if she wanted to. On Monday afternoon, Klein returned to 15 Minsk Street from the Quelaag Club. As Stewart had yet to provide any results from his preliminary investigation, and since he was temporarily unable to find a suitable candidate to become an apothecary, Klein had nothing to do yesterday and today. Therefore, he simply went to the Quelaag Club to practice his shooting, read, and get some free food. In the process, he got to know many other members of the club.
This is the lifeblood for future business opportunities.
Klein sighed with emotion, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray fog. He went about his preparations, step by step, first conjuring the fake world, familiarizing himself with the control of the all-black eye, and then sent a message to the sun that the tarot gathering was about to begin. After all of this was done, Klein waited for 3 o'clock to arrive. Then he reached out to touch the corresponding crimson stars and established a firm connection. The magician had her own illusory star as well. Under the pretext of concentrating on her writing, Forswall sent Gio away, and for a moment she was dazzled by the sudden rush of gray fog. In the blink of an eye, she found herself above the mysterious and serene gray fog. She was inside a majestic palace, and in front of her was an ancient mottled bronze table. Surrounding the table were one blurry figure after another.
One figure after another? One figure after another. Are these the gathering members Mr. Fool spoke of?
Fors felt that the members of this secret gathering were all very, very powerful Beyonders.
Except for me,
She thought, without confidence and full of fear.
However, looking at it from another perspective, since I can join this gathering as a Sequence 9, the other members might not necessarily be very strong. The requirement for this gathering is obviously not about strength, but for some other reason, a member must manage to establish a connection with Mr. Fool.
Forrest quickly rejected her first judgment and relaxed a little. At the same time, Audrey also discovered that there was a new person at today's gathering.
It's a woman. Is it Gio or Fors? Has she passed the examination, or is it someone else?
Audrey nearly forgot to greet Mr. Fool in her bid to take a closer look at the features of the new member. No matter how blurry the figure was, she could still see her hair color, silhouette, her accent, and verbal tics.
I must also take note. At the very beginning, Mr. Hanged Man had managed to identify me as a noble from my special pronunciation of certain words, and from my habit of using certain special words.
Audrey stood up, lifted her skirt, and said to Klein at the end of the long bronze table.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fool.
After the greeting, she didn't conceal her curiosity. She looked at the new member who was seated at the same row as her and asked with a smile,
This is?